how you tell a story. There are various narrators. For example, in Wuthering Heights, who was the narrator? Nellie and Mr. Lockwood, right? So, and then in Pride and Prejudice, we have an omniscient narrator who is basically there, who is telling the story. The characters are not telling the story within the book. It is someone from the outside who is telling the story. And who is that outside? It is Jane Austen who is writing it. So the art of narration basically means the voice that mediates between author and reader. There is the author who writes, and then he gives the book to you to read. And someone has to tell the story. So the one who tells the story becomes the narrator of the book. The narrator becomes the bridge between the author and the reader. Okay. The narrative relationship. What is the relationship between the narrator and the author and the reader? Now, any work of art is produced through the author. He is the one who gives it to you. He is the one who writes it for you. The author, the historical person who creates the entire story and its world. Fine? You understand what an author is? The historical person who creates the entire story. Without the author, you will not have any work of art. If they won't write, how are you going to read it? How are you going to read it? So the author becomes important. Then you have the narrator, one who tells the story. The internal voice that tells the story to the reader. Narration, the voice that mediates between author and reader. The narrative relationship is the author first writes the book, produces the work of art, then it is given to us. When we open the book, there is always a narrator who tells the story. So the internal voice that is there in the book or the movie or any play, the internal voice that tells the story to the reader becomes the narrator. Then there is the character, the person within the story who acts out the event, and then there is the prose narrator who tells the story in prose form, allowing for detailed realism and psychological depth. So prose narrator is basically the same narrative within the novel. It has more depth as most of the others, allowing for detailed realism and psychological depth. There are basically 8 essential types of narrators. The first one is heterodiegetic. Heterodiegetic means a narrator who falls outside the realm of the story. That means, for example, Harry Potter. There is no narrator, but there is someone who tells the story, and who is that someone? It is the author themselves. Fine? That becomes the heterodiegetic narrator outside the story. Fine? That is the first kind. The second kind is omniscient kind of narrator. A narrator who knows everything that has or will happen and every character's thoughts. There is omniscient narrator. There are mostly, let's say, in George Eliot's Middlemarch, then Jane Austen again, Pride and Prejudice is there, Henry Fielding's Tom Jones. The narrator knows everything that is going to happen and everything that will happen, and the thoughts and the minds of the characters. Then the next one is unreliable. Unreliable means obviously someone who lacks credibility. That means sometimes you cannot trust the words of that narrator. Then the next is SOC. SOC means stream of consciousness. In a stream of consciousness, the narrator who is telling you the story jumps from one thought to another. There is no coherence, there is no linearity. That means he can go from A to Z, or he can go from A to E. Stream of consciousness means whatever thoughts are going inside your head, those thoughts, that continuous flow of thoughts is known as stream of consciousness. So it is basically your journal, write a diary, right? When you write a diary, you talk about your entire entire day. What are your thoughts, what are your feelings, how you felt at a certain point, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about your thoughts, your thoughts are never organized. Organized in the sense, it has no coherence. It does not have that sequential chain of events. Does not follow a plot, right? Your mind can go from A to C, from C to F, and so on. So a stream of consciousness is the continuous flow of thoughts inside your head, but not in a coherent manner. That means there is no sequential chain of events. Then there is homodiegetic. Homodiegetic is a narrator who is a character within the story. So people like Nellie Dean and Mr. Lockwood. These people are homodiegetic. The character itself within the book is narrating the story. Understood? Yes or no? Yes. Then there is limited. Limited narration means a narrator who tells the story through a single character's mind. That means there is one character who narrates the entire story, or they fixate on one person. There are, for example, 10 characters within a story. That narrator will only talk about the journey of just one person. He will pick one and he will show you his journey. He will focus on that person's journey. Then there is objective narrator, a narrator who purely focuses on observable actions and dialogue. Objective means someone who observes only your actions. What are you doing rather than what are you thinking or what are your behaviors. So he just focuses not on the psychological depth but what you do, the actions only. Then there is the epistolary kind of narration. Obviously epistolary means what? Through letters. So the story is told through letters. There is no let's say person present to narrate, or there is no narrator present. It is just the letters that you have exchanged, and that is through the letters you understand what goes on inside the story. Plot and structure yesterday we had done. As you can see, the causal sequence of events. Causal means that cause and effect relationship, and it should be in a sequence. I had again explained it to you yesterday. Exposition means setting the scene and the characters. Then you have rising action. Rising action means series of events which is building the tension, building the suspense. There are certain events in a horror story, in a horror book or in a horror movie. You will see that there are certain small events which would take place which builds up to the climax. So what are those small things? The small things can be creaking of the door, someone crying, wailing, the dogs crying, some spirit there might be a presence. So all these are rising action. You don't know what is happening, you just know that something is going to happen. That is called the rising action. Then you have climax, the turning point and the highest tension. That means all the revelations, why is it happening, what is happening, what exactly. You have seen the movie Conjuring? So what happens in that? The rising action is all those things, the paintings falling, there are some apparitions, someone dies, the dog dies away, the daughter talks to some imaginary figure. All these things are what? All these things are rising action. What is the climax? The climax is when finally the mother is possessed. They see the actual, ghost sitting on a cupboard, and from there they understand the story, right? What went behind, what happened in the past. So it is the climax, which is the highest tension point, where all the things are revealed. And from there is the falling action. Dealing with the climax. Now what can you do? There can be exorcisms performed, there can be the family has to leave, and there are so on and so forth. How you deal with the climax. And then the resolution is the final outcome, the final conclusion, which would be there for that climax which has happened. For comedy movies, or let's say that rom-coms, those romantic comedies, the actor, the hero and the heroine basically uniting at the end, defeating the villains, overcoming obstacles. In a horror movie, finally the ghost is defeated and so on, and the family has moved on from that place. So that is the resolution. So remember the Freytag's pyramid, it is very important when it comes to describing a plot or a plot structure. So what is the arc? I've taken Pride and Prejudice as an example. Jane Austen's classic follows a modified pyramid structure. The climax arrives when Darcy's second proposal is accepted, resolving the major romantic tension. So there can be two kinds of climaxes. In Pride and Prejudice, it has two climaxes. First is when Elizabeth finally accepts Darcy's proposal, and the second climax is Lydia's elopement, representing a secondary peak before the final denouement. So in Pride and Prejudice, as we know, that Elizabeth and Darcy had always been at crossroads, at conflict, because of she having too much prejudice against the rich and the noble class, and him having too much pride and arrogance for anyone who was beneath his social class. So finally, in the climax, he does fall in love with Elizabeth, and he proposes the first time. She rejects him because she believes that they are not going to be a good match. So in the climax, she lets go of her prejudice, he lets go of his pride, and finally both of them come together and she basically accepts Darcy's proposal. That is the first climax. What is the second climax? I had told you that Lydia elopes. That means she runs away with George Wickham, right? So she runs away with him, and from there again some kind of problem starts with Elizabeth and Darcy, because George already has a, let's say, troubled relationship with the Darcys. So it is Darcy who basically brings Lydia back. He fights for the family, and it is again there that Elizabeth does fall for him properly. So there are two climaxes. As I said, the climax arrives when Darcy's second proposal accepted. That is one. The second is the inciting incident begins with Bingley's arrival, while Lydia's elopement represents a secondary peak before the final denouement. The following action is the two marriages between Jane and Bingley and Elizabeth and Darcy. Climax and anticlimax, again I have told you yesterday. Climax is the turning point of the highest conflict. It determines the direction of the ending. Example, Elizabeth and Darcy overcoming their mutual pride and prejudice to unite. Right? As I said, the proposal is accepted, and this is the highest point of the conflict, and both of them, it determines the direction of the ending. That means if Elizabeth has accepted the proposal of Darcy, it means how will the ending be? The marriage of both of them. Now what is an anticlimax? Again I had told you in the previous class, a disappointing or trivial resolution to an unexpectedly dramatic situation, used for humor, satire or irony. The anticlimax is always disappointing. The excitement is built and then something very ordinary happens. Does not justify your excitement. That is what is called anticlimax.